Now, these farmers are all members of our Virtual Irrigation Academy. This is a community of practice that's growing rapidly around the world. The Malawian farmers work tiny farms, like just 1 hectare. And the per capita income would be something like $250 a year. So about a quarter of the farmers say that they experience food shortages during the year, so that's down to 1 meal a day. This is life right on the edge for this small landlocked country in Central East Africa. Now, irrigation is seen as a way out of this perilous situation, and Malawi is developing its water resources quickly, as are many other African countries. But irrigation isn't easy. Irrigation schemes are expensive to build, and knowing how much water to apply and when to apply it is problematic. And surprisingly, many decades of research and development have borne very little fruit in this regard, at least almost nothing that is accessible to a smallholder in Malawi. Okay, so I will explain a chameleon sensor to you. It looks like this. There are 3 probes here that are buried in the soil at 3 different depths in the root zone. You come along with a reader and plug it in, and the reader will read each of these by color. So if the soil is wet, it'll read it as blue. If the soil is moist, it'll read it as green. If the soil is dry, it'll read it as red. So the farmers named this chameleon, like, it turns the color of its surroundings. You come along and you take your reading, and there's a 4th sensor, which you can probably just see, which is an ID. And this sensor tells the reader exactly where we are, and it logs the data, and the data jumps off my phone and goes to the cloud, and it produces a pattern that looks like, whoops, okay, so there's a chameleon reader, which if you couldn't see it, it looks like this. So in that case, the topsoil is green, meaning moist. It's red in the middle of the root zone and dry below and wet below the root zone because the color is blue. So when those readings come in day by day, you get a pattern like this. This is collated up on the website, and you can see 3 layers there. Each layer is a depth in the soil, and you start off with blue at all depths. That's very common, and then as time marches on from left to right, you see the green color, which is roots sucking some water out, and you can see how the roots are moving deeper through the soil. As they suck water out, the colors turn to green, and then of course to red when they've got most of the water out. So you generate a chameleon pattern like this. VIA, lift us up, others have failed us. And at first we took this as a song of vindication. At last we'd made it. But on reflection, I had to number myself amongst the others that have failed these ladies and the millions like them. Because for decades I've worked in rural Africa, and for decades I've turned up with my project proposals and my list of milestones and deliverables and the project log frame, and a head full of my own theories of how change happens, all motivated by the dubious metrics of the modern science industry. And I don't want to say these are bad things, but what I most needed to know was what is already there. I needed to know the constraints that these people battled against. I needed to understand the slim opportunities that they tried to exploit. And I needed to understand the consequence of getting it wrong. And in struggling towards the VIA, I came across what the Japanese call tacit to explicit knowledge conversion. Most of the farmers we work with are poorly literate, but they have a rich experiential knowledge born of years and years of toil in that place. And this tacit knowledge is a knowledge that's shared farmer to farmer, face to face with people you trust. But this tacit knowledge is not available to me as the outsider. And by creating a language of colours and patterns, we made this tacit knowledge explicit. The farmers measured their chameleon senses. They produced rich colour patterns, and then we interviewed them. What does your pattern mean? What were you expecting? What pattern would you like to get? Whose pattern got the highest yields? There were the all too common blue-dominated patterns, betraying over-irrigation, all the way through to red-dominated patterns, showing that farmers hadn't got the water that they were entitled to get. So here's a quick story of what might happen on a scheme. The farmers put their chameleon sensors in the ground, they take their readings, and they find out that the chameleon is reading blue, very common, blue at all depths. This one's blue, blue, green. But when they see that it's blue at all depths, they realise that the schemes are too wet. And after a while, they start skipping an irrigation day. Irrigation can take all day. And if you skip a day, you've got time to do other things, like weeding your crop. And if you're putting on less water and then leaching less nutrients away, and if you're weeding, you're going to get a more vigorous crop. And many farmers use the day off from not irrigating to off-farm income-generating activities, so they can buy inputs, better seed, better fertilizers. And of course, if a lot of people are skipping irrigations, then there's more water in the irrigation scheme for when things get tight. So the farmers sing, VIA, lift us up. But what we're seeing is a whole set of feedback loops where these farmers are lifting themselves up. We see higher yields on the schemes. We see more investment in children's education and in home improvements. We see more hiring of non-family labour on the schemes, more local spending in the communities. And most of all, we see less conflict over water. So I'm going to let these ladies have the last word.
Waza waza